right. Welcome to the Pat Life Podcast. As always, I am Patrick, and I am honored to have our next guest on. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I know a lot of you who listen to the show have as well. Without further ado, we have Dr. Barre Paul Lando. How are you today?
Pat, doing great. And aloha. It's nice to
Aloha.
see,
Yeah.
get a little island
Well, this
vibe
this is.
contact from you.
I know. I was gonna say I sent my pigeons over to make sure that you got the invite for this show, and but yeah, for those listening, Bear grew up or spent a lot of his life here on the islands where I am now. So before we came on, we were talking about that, and we were just talking about the development that's happening here, especially in Maui. I mean, all the islands for sure, but this does play actually into what we're talking about today in many ways in regards to changes, moving with the changes of life, and honestly, a place like here, the Aloha spirit, talking about the breath and the importance of the breath. All this plays into a lot of the conversation I wanted to have. But before I start just going off on all the things I'd love to talk about, those who don't know who you are, what you do, would you like to just share a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I always begin my bio with the most important thing I think that I participated in my life, which was being a jock. And because I was not involved in academics, I hated academics when I was a kid. I was always in trouble and, did everything I could do to ditch school and, just head out to the beach and, hang out with my buddies and everything. So, but in school, the reason why I went to college, only reason is because I excelled in some sports and I had athletic scholarships to top universities all over the country. And I ended up going to school on a football scholarship. And, that was my segue actually into medicine, which I ended up spending my career in. And, I grew up in rural Northern California, so we were, just kind of wild kids out in nature back then in the 50s. So, whole different contrast with life for kids now. And I feel very fortunate that I grew up when I did. I can look back and just see the, what's happened and where we've been led and so forth. But that really shaped, just my temperament and what I chose to do as a vocation in life. But through sports, I was a little ahead of the pack during that era, and that I started really doing some scientific training to get the most out of my body, and with that, I started studying, physiology. At a good level, and nutrition as it was back then, and and different levels of let's just say neurological based training. I spent a lot of time in university libraries and everything. And you have to remember, this is all pre-internet. So you actually walked to the library and read books. And I spent a lot of time there. And that augmented my training. And then I got academically involved through that, through college, ended up graduating with a 4.0, and, played out my football days. I had a double major, pre-law, pre-med. And then I also got a graduate degree in psychology, which I was completed my last year of sports eligibility because I graduated early. And then, a bunch of stuff in between, but then that led me to getting a certification at Stanford Medical School, and I ended up being a high-level kind of emergency services out of a fire department in Northern California with that certification, because this one department was this experimental program working with Stanford Medical School to see if they could get ER-level skills out in the streets. So it's like beyond paramedics. So I did that for a few years, and it was great. And I learned a lot of basic MASH skills, really got them down. And then after 5 years, I kind of felt like rather than continuing on as an MD or some such thing, I just felt like I got what I needed. Went on to 4-year naturopathic college, majored in, or my specialty was Chinese medicine, classical homeopathy. And then in order to get a license, because naturopaths weren't licensed in all the states back then, I went to chiropractic college. And then I did a lot of postdoctoral training, was in the pioneering circles of clinical kinesiology, studied with masters in meridian therapy, osteopathy, got into radiesthesia early on, and, where my career really, developed its core as I got involved with the original German bioterrain specialist in Europe, learned live cell microscopy. So from that point on,
Mm-hmm.
I integrated a lot of in-house labs that aren't, done in conventional circles. That tell you a whole different story of what conventional labs, when you go to your regular doc, show you. And then looked at everybody's blood. So I've, looked at people's blood, thousands of people, and I had about a 40-year career in that. And then bioterrain medicine. Sorry, I don't mean to be long-winded, but it's there's sort of a continuity
Keep it
with what
going.
I do now. I'm a full-time farmer. I certified in permaculture and I have a master gardener, background
I
as
love it.
well. And that's because bioterrain medicine really taught me the principles of how nature works, and it's the same in the body as it is out in the soil. So that's what I do now, and I employ the same understanding and even some of the same lab work when I'm testing the soil. And it's basically there's no separation between our bodies and the soil, and so that's what I do now. And I work in my alchemical lab, which alchemical isn't something mystical; it's just a full bodied science, and I make things, test out these principles, and make products from what I grow here on our farm.
That's incredible. And please don't think it's ever long-winded. You have quite the resume, and a lot of people who don't know who you are, or even who know who you are, I'd love to hear it because, as we know in life, most of us at least, it takes time, practice, struggle, and obviously curiosity, trying new things, exploring different places, seeing what you can grab from each of these. We live in this mindset of like, everything's terrible over here. It's like, instead of being able to, like, well, what did I take from it? What did I learn from it? What was I able to take and carry on to something else? And as you were just saying, not that you're saying that farming is bad. Obviously, it's amazing and it's beautiful, but it is these parallels you could start to take. You're like, oh, I'm seeing a pattern here. And this goes to what you and many others say. Crow 777 says it specifically all the time, like there's no lie in nature. In all these conversations that you're having, that other people are having, for someone like myself, who also has a background in, I've been a personal trainer for over 10 years. I saw myself, listening to you speak, now 3, 4 years ago, listening to your content, being like, this is very much in line where how I see that something isn't being expressed here in the mainstream. So I need to go find what it is that I'm looking for. I've had the benefit of having audio, visual to watch, but for someone like myself, I realized I had to go to the books too. And here's the thing, kind of bringing it back to your early life. You're a jock, somebody who's like, dude, I just want to play sports, maybe chase girls at the time, like just be a guy. And you realize it's through that, your desire to just go and be and explore and be curious and live life, that's also what makes you so, you know, passionate and driven. So when it is something that catches your attention, you're like, I'm gonna go find it. You know what I mean? Or it's like, I love surfing. Like, you lived your life, traveling the world. You're like, I'm gonna go find those waves. I'm gonna go find them. And it's like, some people can't fathom that desire for answers, for solutions, for purpose, for, life. And so for me, like, I'm one of those people, I'd like to think. And so when you talking about your things, I'm like, all right, I need to go explore. What is pleomorphism? Who is Rudolf Steiner? Who are all these people? And what do I need to know about them? How many books can I find? And it's so fascinating to hear your story, because now it's like, all right, how do we connect these dots? And then how do we apply it? And I would love to talk. I know I just said a bunch there, but I want to kind of try to kind of weave us in here to some of these specifics, if that's cool with you. So one of the things that you were talking about was this German new medicine idea, right? Which then led you into the bioterrain. You've been talking a lot about it, but for those who maybe aren't quite sure, what is this idea of bioterrain theory?
Well, you mentioned German New Medicine, and that is a
Yeah.
separate discipline that I would consider a tool within bioterrain medicine because it's really understanding more the neurological um, connection that would be the basis of an authentic taxonomy of disease, rather than,
Hmm.
conventional theories of disease being a separate entity within nature that somehow exists or created by pathogens or unknown etiology, which, when I was studying pathology in school, half the stuff they say, we don't know how the hell this stuff starts, but we're working on it, and then the rest of it was, of
Yep.
course, all blaming bugs for our ills. So, it's really important to understand how different traumas and things that happen on the psychic plane trigger a neurological response that then in turn trigger a physiological response in some tissue or organ system of the body that then biologically express in order to relieve to mirror that trauma on the psychic plane that then allows the body to relieve that pressure for you and allows you to evolve, on deeper levels as a sentient being. So back to bioterrain medicine as a whole, it's basically what I do here on the farm every day. You're understanding that it's a living ecosystem. There's an interconnectedness. In fact, I don't even like to say interconnectedness because it's literally only one. And, when you get into basic hermetic principles, it's really the truth and the most scientific uh, maxim we could think of is that there can only be one. And then if you understand how those forces of the one play out, and we could get really nerdy as far as how that happens, but then that creates a multiplication of forces that create all the characteristics that we experience in the appearance world. And also when you're doing farming, when you're doing medicine, when I'm working in my lab, it's not just useful, but it's absolutely essential that you understand those principles and those mechanisms, because then you can practice authentic medicine, you can practice sustainable farming, and you can also produce medicines that actually work without doing harm and work on very potent levels of all three levels on your being, not just trying to provoke a counterbalance to some kind of symptom, but actually, improve your well-being on every level. So bioterrain medicine, first off, like any good system, you need a little bit of a process where you can observe what's going on. And so the basis of bioterrain, or at the core, and you don't have to, incorporate this, but I did, very much so, is the microscope, because when you can open up vistas into that inner world and see the cells, the elementals within your body, then that tells you, very specifically what's going on. And when I looked at those cells, I could see different byproducts of different organisms that live within our body. There are little ecobionts, there are partners, if you want to think of it that way. Life on the biological level would not be possible without them. And they go through cyclic changes to accommodate jobs that they have to do in the body. And sometimes when they go through different cyclic progressions, and when they're, say, reach a bacterial phase or a fungal phase where they just have a job to do, that can create symptoms, even though the symptoms are related to eliminations and things that really are needed for our longevity. But then those symptoms in turn are blamed on the bugs that are circumstantially, at the scene of the crime, rather than understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, and knowing how to work with them. So when I looked at the microscope, I could see determine which organism families were at work, what stages they were at, and then that would tell me what was going on in the body. And I had different ways also to challenge the blood by putting these microorganism the basic seed forms of these that I have, I still have them in my cabinet behind me there, where I could put a drop, mix it with blood, and then deliberately provoke, elements within the blood based on that particular organism family. And if there was a response, then that would tell me even more so that there was an environment within the body that we would call, a mucor environment or an aspergillus environment. And if we got a response from any, number of these particular organisms, then we could, really expedite rather than just looking at the blood in general, which you can tell a lot. But then when you challenge blood with, these different developers, you could, really determine quickly what was going on and then know what to do about it. And then when it got to actually treating the body, we'd also do labs that would tell us a good deal as far as what the electrical resistance in the body was, because we are, the universe is electrical, our bodies are. So the labs I did would allow me to take molecular byproducts, if you want to think of it that way, chemistry, and then extrapolate that to what it meant on an electrical level by putting the numbers, the ratios of numbers that I would find relative to each of these key chemicals that the body is supposed to regulate every single moment in order to create the least line of resistance in our body, electrically speaking. So we do that, and I could go on more about that, but with then radiesthesia was another thing where I would actually, and when I say would, I still do some of these things, even though I'm retired and don't see people anymore, but I use it, in my other endeavors. Radiesthesia is a way that you could take different instruments that need the practitioner to attune with the instruments. So unlike hooking somebody up to an EKG or something, which I used to do that kind of stuff, you're plugging the instrument into a wall socket, which means you got dirty electricity. So all it can discern is electricity on its crudest, most physical form. That's okay when you want to see what the heart's doing or an EEG, see what the brain waves are doing. It's all useful. I'm not saying anything otherwise. However, if you want to see where the original electrical vectors emanate from, you have to go to those more subtle, refined energy levels, on the astral, mental, etheric plane, and so forth, because those are the ones produced directly from our consciousness that create the resonance that then creates our experience and our biology in the first place. Yeah. So part of my assessment would absolutely have to be, that incorporated as well. And there's a lot we could talk more about as far as how that works. Biogeometry is, more of a recent refinement of radiesthesia. So I do that as well in more later years here. But after the assessment with all those tools, then you go to old school stuff. You're listening to pulses, doing abdominal diagnosis. You're testing the neurology with specific, neurological based muscle testing, not this crude muscle testing you see people doing these days, but, real neurological base. And a number of other things, you feel osteopathic, we call it osteopathic listening. You feel what the cranial and visceral motions are doing, which tell you quite a bit. And then, you put all that together. That's a real diagnostic assessment. The thing is you can't do it in a 10-minute office visit. I used to spend at least 2 hours with every single person. You have to. And then when it gets to that point, then I'd use a neurological based, kind of clinical kinesiology in order to not only determine what the priorities were as far as all the things that I found, but the priority, what needed to be addressed, and then you expose them neurologically and then treat things in a proper sequence with whatever tool that you need to do the job. Just like a tradesman, you got to have a full tool belt. So it might require, acupuncture, sound therapy, osteopathic adjusting, sometimes even a chiropractic adjustment, any tool that you could train yourself at a high level of proficiency then that would allow you to, what I consider ply my trade, at a higher level. And I've always considered myself a tradesman, which is much
Hmm.
different than the new level of medical practitioner, which is more of a academian that works, solely on the mental plane and then tries to intervene by manipulating the chemistry with synthetic means.
See, for those who know me and the show, now know how happy I am. This is what I love to talk about, and I love that we went through all of that. Now, for a lot of people, they're like, what did he just say? But let me ask you this. In this process of taking a patient, like you said, giving them more than your 10 minutes, taking the time to really analyze and explore every aspect of their being, as you said, not just the physical, but the being in itself with a capital B. A lot of people will ask, okay, did people get better? Did people have more insight into what their problems were or things that were trying to communicate with them through their physical body? And did people working with you and through this process or processes even similar, did they find themselves on that path of healing from your experience? That's a question I know I'm going to get.
Sure. Well, that was my job, was to help people grow their awareness as far as why their experience was happening in the first place. My job was not to heal anybody, because no individual in our history can heal another person.
I
Even
agree.
some of the great ones said, "Do you believe?" before they would help somebody heal. In other words, that was a way of
Hmm.
saying, are you ready to go there? So, the first
Yeah.
thing as a practitioner at any high level that you develop is how to assess where a person is at. Now, if you do this long enough and do it at a certain level, just like, I always thought, how the heck does a wine taster know that there was asparagus growing, in the farm next door, just by tasting? But, they've developed that sense. As a practitioner,
Hmm.
you develop the same extrasensory perception. We'll say it's not extra, it's just a dimension that most people don't develop for lack of practice or belief system.
For sure.
So when somebody comes in, I was able to, number one, read, everybody has their story written across their face, whether they know it or
Hmm.
not. And you could also
Yep.
see, the different hues of colors and discolorations and things that would give you a big hint. But then you'd also, talk to people, because number one, we all need to be heard. Everybody, I think, has a great need to be heard. So you really want to be with them, and whether you think you need it or not for your assessment medically, you need to listen to people. But when you're listening, you're not just listening to the words, you're listening to the tone, in their voice. You're understanding that that tone is emanating from a particular organ system. You can tell if it's distorted or coming out in a clean way. There's many
Hmm.
levels of perception just by being with a person, observing and talking. And through that, you can quickly find out where a person is at. Now, I might, observe that there's certain things going on many levels, and I might think, and this is a temptation that all practitioners have. Oh, I want to go fix that, because we think that's more
Hmm.
upstream or more fundamental. But it may not be where the person is at or ready to handle. So sometimes you have
Hmm.
to sit on your hands and really start and honor where a person needs to be, even if you think it's at a most rudimentary level. That's really the art of medicine. It's not just a
Hmm.
science, it has to be an art. It has to have philosophy in order to be a complete science. So that's where I would
Yep.
begin. And through that, you can, lead them through their journey of awareness and not push them too quick or even push them off the edge, which is possible. And, allow
Totally.
them to just see, make one discerning observation after another. And, down the road, people would very often understand why I told them the very first visit, which is what I told every single person that I would see over the years, is you don't need me.
Same.
I cannot fix you, only you can fix
Same.
yourself. But what we're going to do is create the space for in order for you to do that. And so people would look back, they say, okay, I get it now. And to answer your
Yep.
question, very often, most of the time, and nothing to do with me, but to do with them and honoring them all along the way and having a good way to listen and then to employ adjustments along the way to create a reset that they needed to grow that next level of awareness. People most often got better. In my practice,
Hmm.
it was very international. We had a couple-year wait list all the time. And people would come in with very serious conditions. It would be what you would consider a difficult practice. And that was good for me too, because it always pushed me. Because just when I would think I got a handle on something, that next person would say, you've got to grow yourself as a practitioner. And as a
Hmm.
practitioner, what you have to understand as every person comes into you, you can see that little issue within yourself, within the whole collective, and you use that as an opportunity to grow your own awareness. And that, of course, is what over time allows you to help people, because you've always got to stay just a half step ahead of the folks that are coming in to see you. And, some
Hmm.
folks would challenge me, and I always enjoyed that because I realized that was my growth process as well. And, I think as physicians, we have to get over this concept that somehow, we're a little bit elevated beyond, the rest of the folks, or no more in any way, because I don't care what we do, doctor or otherwise, we do it because it's what we need to learn the most.
Absolutely. And it's a great response. And that's something that I've learned in my short journey here, is that letting people know, like, one, the healing process is within yourself. It's nothing that I can do. It's nothing that I will ever be able to do. All I've come to understand or understand about where I play in the journey next to you is facilitating to some capacity, more than anything, your observation awareness of self. As you're doing that, I'm also simultaneously doing that with my own journey. Like you said, okay, you brought in a challenge. I need to be more aware of myself in my relationship, in my oneness with this place that we're in, and really use my senses to connect, to listening, really listening to what, in my opinion, God is bringing to this realm that we have these bodies in. And I think that's, for me, is what's interesting is when I do stuff with people, is I've kind of broken it down to the most simplest form of on under like this knowledge for people, and myself included. It's going like, we're bodies in constant flow. Everything's in motion. Your blood has to go through the body back to the heart. Your cerebral spinal fluid has to go through the brain, through the spinal cord, and back to the brain. If it's not flowing efficiently, what's happening? We've minimized or we've reduced that flow. We need to get your flow back. How do we do that? We need to be present. We need to be right here. This is all we got. And I try to make it as simple as possible. And through that, through that facilitating, to just get people aware of that most simple but yet so complicated thing for so many, I've noticed just even in that, so many people go, whoa, now I have a whole new awareness of this vessel that, I'm in, that I embody. And it's really fascinating to watch, because then, like you said, with your patients, it gives them this ability to take it and go through their healing journey. But what I've observed, and maybe you have as well, is that there's this whole new life that comes to people when they go, man, I do have the driver's seat in this journey. No one else has this. I get to do it. And there's like this shift that I see in people, and it's, for me, it's fascinating, because it is letting us all know that everything's at our disposal. All these other outside sources, this outsourcing is nothing more for a lot of people than outsourcing. But when you know that, and if the other person who's facilitating that knows that they're just facilitating, there's a symbiosis that starts to occur where everyone's on the same page of like, I'm not here to heal you. I'm not the one walking around with my hands up trying to part the seas, you know what I mean? Like, or do anything silly. I'm just here to facilitate your journey, and you're also here to facilitate my journey. If we can agree on that, we can make sense of that relationship. Now you're in your healing process. I too am on my healing process, because it's, you know, whether it's taking away sense of ego, or if like I know everything, and then you meet somebody and they give you a challenge and you're like, I don't know what to do. You know, it's like, so it's a beautiful, again, I look at it as like this beautiful flow that's constantly happening.
Thanks for checking out our free preview of the podcast. If you want to listen to the rest of this episode and many others like it, become a member at thepatlife.org.